Part 3. The History of Urantia. Paper 57. The Origin of Urantia. In presenting excerpts from the archives of Jerusalem for the records of Urantia respecting its antecedents and early history, we are directed to reckon time in terms of current usage, the present leap year calendar of 365 1/4 days to the year. As a rule, no attempt will be made to give exact years, though they are of record. We will use the nearest whole numbers as the better method of presenting these historic facts. When referring to an event as of 1 or 2 millions of years ago, we intend to date such an occurrence back that number of years from the early decades of the 20th century of the Christian era. We will thus depict these far-distant events as occurring in even periods of thousands, millions, and billions of years. 1. The Andronover Nebula. Urantia is of origin in your Sun, and your Sun is one of the multifarious offspring of the Andronover Nebula, which was one time organized as a component part of the physical power and material matter of the local universe of Nebadon. And this great nebula itself took origin in the universal force charge of space in the super-universe of Orvonton, long, long ago. At the time of the beginning of this recital, the primary master force organizers of Paradise had long been in full control of the space energies which were later organized as the Andronover Nebula. 987 billion years ago, Associate Force Organizer and then Acting Inspector number 811,307 of the Orvonton series, traveling out from Uversa, reported to the Ancients of Days that space conditions were favorable for the initiation of materialization phenomena in a certain sector of the then easterly segment of Orvonton. 900 billion years ago, the Uversa archives testify there was recorded a permit issued by the Uversa Council of Equilibrium to the super-universe government authorizing the dispatch of a force organizer and staff to the region previously designated by Inspector number 811,307. The Orvonton authorities commissioned the original discoverer of this potential universe to execute the mandate of the Ancients of Days calling for the organization of a new material creation. The recording of this permit signifies that the force organizer and staff had already departed from Uversa on the long journey to that easterly space sector, where they were subsequently to engage in those protracted activities which would terminate in the emergence of a new physical creation in Orvonton. 875 billion years ago, the enormous Andronover Nebula, number 876,926, was duly initiated. Only the presence of the force organizer and the liaison staff was required to inaugurate the energy whirl which eventually grew into this vast cyclone of space. Subsequent to the initiation of such nebular revolutions, the living force organizers simply withdraw at right angles to the plane of the revolutionary disk, and from that time forward, the inherent qualities of energy ensure the progressive and orderly evolution of such a new physical system. At about this time, the narrative shifts to the functioning of the personalities of the super-universe. In reality, the story has its proper beginning at this point, at just about the time the Paradise Force organizers are preparing to withdraw, having made the space energy conditions ready for the action of the power directors and physical controllers of the super-universe of Orvonton. 2. The primary nebular stage. All evolutionary material creations are born of circular and gaseous nebulae, and all such primary nebulae are circular throughout the early part of their gaseous existence. As they grow older, they usually become spiral, and when their function of sun formation has run its course, they often terminate as clusters of stars or as enormous suns, surrounded by a varying number of planets, satellites, and smaller groups of matter, in many ways resembling your own diminutive solar system. 800 billion years ago, the Andronover creation was well established as one of the magnificent primary nebulae of Orvonton. As the astronomers of nearby universes looked out upon this phenomenon of space, they saw very little to attract their attention. Gravity estimates made in adjacent creations indicated that space materializations were taking place in the Andronover regions, but that was all. 700 billion years ago, the Andronover system was assuming gigantic proportions, and additional physical controllers were dispatched to 9 surrounding material creations to afford support and supply cooperation to the power centers of this new material system, which was so rapidly evolving. At this distant date, all of the material bequeathed to the subsequent creations was held within the confines of this gigantic space wheel, which continued ever to whirl and, after reaching its maximum of diameter, to whirl faster and faster as it continued to condense and contract. 600 billion years ago, the height of the Andronover energy mobilization period was attained. The nebula had acquired its maximum of mass. At this time it was a gigantic circular gas cloud, in shape somewhat like a flattened spheroid. This was the early period of differential mass formation and varying revolutionary velocity. Gravity and other influences were about to begin their work of converting space gases into organized matter. 3. The secondary nebular stage. The enormous nebula now began gradually to assume the spiral form and to become clearly visible to the astronomers of even distant universes. This is the natural history of most nebulae. Before they begin to throw off suns and start upon the work of universe building, these secondary space nebulae are usually observed as spiral phenomena. The nearby star students of that faraway era, as they observed this metamorphosis of the Andronover Nebula, saw exactly what 20th century astronomers see when they turn their telescopes spaceward and view the present-age spiral nebulae of adjacent outer space. About the time of the attainment of the maximum of mass, the gravity control of the gaseous content commenced to weaken, and there ensued the stage of gas escapement, the gas streaming forth as 2 gigantic and distinct arms, which took origin on opposite sides of the mother mass. The rapid revolutions of this enormous central core soon imparted a spiral appearance to these 2 projecting gas streams. The cooling and subsequent condensation of portions of these protruding arms eventually produced their knotted appearance. These denser portions were vast systems and subsystems of physical matter whirling through space in the midst of the gaseous cloud of the nebula while being held securely within the gravity grasp of the mother wheel. But the nebula had begun to contract, and the increase in the rate of revolution further lessened gravity control, and ere long the outer gaseous regions began actually to escape from the immediate embrace of the nebular nucleus, passing out into space on circuits of irregular outline, returning to the nuclear regions to complete their circuits, and so on. But this was only a temporary stage of nebular progression. The ever-increasing rate of whirling was soon to throw enormous suns off into space on independent circuits. And this is what happened in Andronover ages upon ages ago. The energy wheel grew and grew until it attained its maximum of expansion, and then, when contraction set in, it whirled on faster and faster until, eventually, the critical centrifugal stage was reached, and the great breakup began. 500 billion years ago, the first Andronover sun was born. This blazing streak broke away from the mother gravity grasp and tore out into space on an independent adventure in the cosmos of creation. Its orbit was determined by its path of escape. Such young suns quickly become spherical and start out on their long and eventful careers as the stars of space. Excepting terminal nebular nucleuses, the vast majority of orponton suns have had an analogous birth. These escaping suns pass through varied periods of evolution and subsequent universe service. 400 billion years ago began the recaptive period of the Andronover Nebula. Many of the nearby and smaller suns were recaptured as a result of the gradual enlargement and further condensation of the mother nucleus. Very soon there was inaugurated the terminal phase of nebular condensation, the period which always precedes the final segregation of these immense space aggregations of energy and matter. It was scarcely a million years subsequent to this epoch that Michael of Nebadon, a creator son of Paradise, selected this disintegrating nebula as the site of his adventure in universe building. Almost immediately the architectural worlds of Salvington and the 100 constellation headquarters groups of planets were